The night had swallowed the town whole, its silence broken only by the sound of frantic footsteps. Clara ran. Her breath rasped in desperate rhythm, each exhale leaving a mist of fear in the frigid air. The wedding gown that once gleamed white beneath chandeliers, now clung to her body in tatters. Drenched in mud and rain, heavy as a shroud. Veil torn, lace undone, she was no longer a bride, she was a fugitive fleeing her own grave. She did not dare look back. Behind her, the grand cathedral loomed in memory, its bells tolling like a death knell, sealing vows she never wished to speak. A family's bargain, a husband she did not love, a prison built of silk and diamonds. And so she ran, clutching the fabric of her dress as though tearing it free might also free her soul. Her lungs burned. Her legs trembled. The cobblestones were slick, and yet she pressed on through the labyrinth of empty streets, guided only by the moon's pale lament. It felt as though the city itself had died and left her wandering among its bones. Then she stopped. A presence. Not a sound, not a shadow, but something heavier than breath itself, pressing against her chest. Slowly, as though compelled by a hand she could not see. Clara lifted her gaze. There he stood, a solitary figure beneath a rusted lamppost, its dim glow bending unnaturally toward him, as if the light itself were enslaved by his presence. His suit was blacker than midnight, impeccable, untouched by the rain that drenched the earth. His face remained hidden in shadow, but his eyes, oh his eyes burned through the distance, piercing, patient, unblinking. It was not the gaze of a stranger. It was the gaze of someone who had been waiting. Clara's heart lurched. She should have screamed. She should have fled. But the sound caught in her throat, strangled by the knowledge that this moment was inevitable, that her flight had always been toward him, not away. The silence thickened until it rang louder than any bell. And then, impossibly, his lips moved. Though the distance between them stretched across the lonely street, the words slid into her ear as intimately as if whispered against her skin. You're finally mine, bride. The night shuddered. The echo of his words rang inside Clara's skull long after the night swallowed him whole. She stood paralyzed beneath the trembling lamplight, chest heaving, heart pounding with a terror she could not name. And as the world held its breath, her own mind betrayed her, dragging her back, unwilling, to the life she had just abandoned. Clara had been born into wealth, but never into freedom. The Whitmore estate was an empire built on glass and iron, glittering, brittle, suffocating. Her father's voice was law, her mother's smile a mask. Every corridor in the mansion smelled of dust, polished silver, and old expectations. From the moment she could walk, Clara had been groomed not to live, but to marry. Her cage came in the shape of a man named Michael Harland. On the surface, Michael was every father's dream, a young magnate. Handsome, powerful, a suitor with teeth polished to perfection. To society, he was charm incarnate. To Clara, he was a locked door with no key. His hand was cold even when it caressed, his voice honeyed until it sharpened to command. Alone, his gaze was the chill of a blade at her throat. Clara had smiled at banquets, played her role, and lowered her eyes when he spoke. Inside, she screamed. At night, she dreamed not of diamonds or titles, but of warmth and impossible love. Faceless yet tender, someone who would look at her and truly see. A childish fantasy, perhaps. But the only thing that kept her alive in a world that demanded her obedience. The day of the wedding arrived, draped in velvet and lies. The cathedral bloomed with roses, red as spilled wine. Candles dripped wax like slow tears upon golden stands. Guests whispered praises of the perfect match. Clara, hidden beneath her veil, swallowed her dread like poison. Each step down the aisle was a death march, her father's grip firm upon her arm. Michael's smile stretched thin with possession. When the vows reached her lips, something shattered. Not the chandeliers, not the glass, but her will to comply. She ran from the aisle, from the roses, from the suffocating gaze of a groom she would rather die than obey. Rain welcomed her like absolution, drenching silk and lace until she became a phantom sprinting through the night. And now, in the present, Clara pressed her palm against her heaving chest, dragging air into starved lungs. She had escaped Michael. She had defied her father. She had torn free of a destiny written in ink, not her own. Relief bloomed. Fragile and intoxicating, like the first breath after drowning. But she did not yet know freedom had a price. And she had already drawn the gaze of something older, darker, more possessive than any mortal groom. Somewhere in the shadows, the man beneath the lamppost waited. Not her betrothed, not her savior, but the collector of brides. By morning, the storm had washed away the tracks of Clara's escape. The world wore a cruel mask of normalcy. Church bells chimed, carriages rattled over cobblestone, and the newspapers screamed with scandal not of her absence but of another. Another bride was gone. The whispers spread through the city like plague. A young woman, radiant in lace and pearls, had vanished the very night of her vows. No ransom, no trasonly. Her bouquet, wilted and damp, left upon a windowsill as if placed there by a steady hand. And beneath the whispers grew a rumor, older than the bells themselves. They said there was a man, a phantom, a suitor of shadows who collected brides not for marriage, but for eternity. A creature who claimed his chosen with roses and silence. A thief of veils and vows. Clara read the words inked in trembling print, her blood turning cold as the morning tea at her lips soured. For though the city mourned this bride, she could not shake the terror that she, too, had been marked. That night, returning to the Whitmore mansion under cover of disgrace, Clara's steps faltered. The gates loomed, the lanterns sputtered, and upon the doorstep lay something that should not have been there. Her wedding gown no longer caked in mud, no longer torn from her desperate flight. It was folded with meticulous care, each crease smoothed as though by loving hands. Placed like an offering before her door. Her heart stuttered. Fingers trembled as she reached for the silk. It was cold to the touch, carrying a scent she did not know yet, could never forget. Metallic, like rain on iron. Threaded with the faint sweetness of roses pressed between coffin pages. Someone had followed her. Someone had touched what she had shed. Someone wanted her back. That night, Clara dreamed. She wandered through a chapel, drowned in shadows, where every pew was filled, not with guests, but with mannequins dressed in veils and wilted crowns. 1,000 hollow eyes stared as she walked the aisle alone. At the altar, he stood, the man in black, beneath the lamplight. His features were obscured, shifting, but his presence burned. In his hands, he bore not a ring but a crown of silver thorns. He placed it upon her brow. Cold metal kissed her porcelain skin. His voice sank into her bones, velvet and venom entwined. You're the only one I want. The words lingered even after Clara awoke, clinging to her mind like cobwebs spun across a broken mirror. She told herself it had been only a dream yet, when dawn spilled pale across her chamber. She felt watched, as though the walls themselves bore witness, and then she saw him at first. Nothing more than a silhouette at the end of a crowded marketplace. A figure draped in black, among the swirl of colors and voices. He stood utterly still, while the world moved. And though no one else seemed to notice, Clara felt his gaze cut through the distance, fastening her to him. The next day, she caught him again, not in the flesh, but in the reflection of her window. Behind her, though the room was empty, a man's shadow stretched long, framed in candlelight. She turned, nothing. Yet when she looked back at the glass, he was there. Lips curved into a smile, both tender and terrible. Everywhere, he was everywhere. And yet not like a phantom, haunting her, but like a suitor, wooing her. His presence was not always a curse. At times, it was intoxicating. The scent of roses seemed to follow her, faint but undeniable. Candles in her room, though left unlit, would flicker as if to greet her. At night, when silence pressed close, she swore she heard a low voice, humming an old wedding hymn, turned softer, almost a lullaby. Clara's heart warred with itself. Fear told her to flee. But a strange fascination kept her still. For though she had never known Livonly cold arrangements and Michael's cruel hand, this presence cloaked her in an attention she had never been granted. He watched her, yes, but he also chose her. One evening, she followed the trail. It began with a rose, left upon her windowsill. A white rose, but one edge stained crimson, as if dipped in blood. Against all reason, she took it in hand, and with it came a pull. An urging toward the old quarter of the city, where houses sagged with age and silence. There, behind doors long abandoned, she found a room. The air was stale. The floorboards groaned, but the walls were lined with garments. Dozens of them. Wedding gowns, yellowed with time, lace eaten by moths, yet hung with reverence, as though awaiting their bride's return. Each dress bore a tag. Each tag a name. Women whispered about in hushed tones. Women whose weddings never came. Clara's breath broke into shards. Her fingers brushed the silk nearest her, trembling over the ink scrawled across its label. And there at the very end of the row hung a gown not yet claimed by dust, white as winter, perfect, waiting. Its tag bore but one name, written in a hand she now knew all too well: Clara Whitmore. Her name written upon that waiting gown still burned in her vision, when a voice, low and velvet, curled around the silence. "You found them," it said. "My brides." Clara spun, her breath tearing from her throat, tanned this time. The shadow was no longer a shadow. He stepped into the pale moonlight filtering through the broken window. A man in the form of a funeral hymn. Tall, immaculate, dressed in black, that clung like midnight itself. His face striking, almost unholy in its beauty, was carved in paleness, features sharp as though sculpted from marble. His hair fell dark against his temple, and his eyes, God, his eyes? They gleamed like the depths of a grave, yet burned with impossible devotion. Lucian, the name pressed itself into Clara's mind, though he had not spoken it yet. "Who are you?" she whispered, the words splintering with fear. His smile was soft, almost reverent. "The one who loves what others discard. The one who tends to the vows no man keeps." He gestured to the rows of gowns around them. "They are mine, Clara. They will never rot in the ground, never be forgotten. I keep them, as I will keep you." Her pulse thundered in her veins. You killed them." Lucian shook his head gently, as though correcting a child. "Not their bodies. Only what truly mattered, their promise. They are forever. I saved them." Her skin still burned with the memory of his lips, gold as gravestone marble pressing against her hand. The mark lingered like frostbite, and with it, a truth she dared not name. Clara was not kissed. She was claimed, so she ran. Through streets veiled in mist. Through forests where branches clawed at her gown like skeletal hands. Through alleys where her footsteps echoed louder than her breath, Clara ran. Yet, with each step, strength seeped from her body, as though the earth itself drew life from her veins. Her vision dimmed, her pulse slowed. It was as if the farther she pulled from him, the more her existence unraveled. And then his voice, steady velvet, inexorable, threaded into her ear, though no figure followed her. "You can run, my bride, but you cannot flee what you are. Without me, you fade. With me, you endure. I'll give you eternal love. No betrayal, no pain. Just us." The promise was poison wrapped in silk. Yet her body, traitorous and trembling, longed to yield to its comfort, at last. She collapsed against a shattered mirror, abandoned in an alley. Glass fractured but still catching the dim glow of lamplight. Clara raised her head and froze. For in the reflection, another woman stared back. A bride white gown, tattered. Face pale and hollow. Eyes brimming with a sorrow so vast it felt bottomless. She raised a finger to her lips, warning silence, then whispered in a voice like broken glass, "Leave him. Before you belong to him, forever." Clara recoiled, clutching her chest. "Who are you?" The reflection smiled, sad, weary, knowing. And in that moment, Clara understood with horror what no words need confirm. The woman in the glass was herself. Not as she was, but as she would be, if she surrendered. Clara's breath still caught in her throat, staring at the reflection of her own hollowed face. But when she blinked, when she staggered back from the broken glass, she was no longer in the alley at all. Darkness wrapped around her like a curtain, velvet and endless. The air was heavy with the scent of wilted lilies and candle wax. Slowly, a pale glow emerged, frames upon frames lining invisible walls, portraits, hundreds of them. Each canvas bore the likeness of a woman in white, frozen in bridal finery. Their veils trailed like cobwebs. Their flowers wilted to dust. Their faces were porcelain masks, beautiful, ethereal, but their eyes were empty voids, staring without sight, without soul. Clara's knees weakened. "Who are they?" From the shadows, a voice, low, silken, inevitably answered, "They are mine." Lucian stepped into the dim glow, clad in black, that seemed spun from the void itself. His skin was moonlight, his gaze a storm of eternity. With a gesture of his hand, the portraits seemed to breathe, their veils fluttering, though no wind stirred. He moved between them, like a priest in a chapel. Each of these women was chosen, promised, saved from betrayal, from age, from decay. I gave them a love that never falters. Clara's heart pounded, though she could not tell if from fear or the dangerous ache of longing. The brides did not scream. They did not suffer. They simply were. Eternal, untouchable, adored but stripped of voice, of choice, of freedom. Lucian turned, his eyes devouring her. They are not dead, Clara. They are not alive. They are forever. She staggered closer, her trembling fingers grazing the frame nearest her. The bride's lips were parted in the faintest smile, but her eyes were bottomless glass. Clara pulled back, a shudder searing her spine. Her world collapsed between two hungers. The mortal life she knew, filled with cruelty and abandonment, and the eternity Lucian promised, without pain, but without freedom. Her pulse whispered traitorously, "What if forever love is worth the chains?" But then her eyes caught on one final frame. At the very end of the hall, half shrouded in shadow, a new portrait hung. The paint still wet. Clara stepped closer, her breath faltering. Her own face stared back. Her lips painted pale. Her veil rendered in strokes of ghostly white. Her portrait was already among them. Her painted likeness stared at her cold, eternal, already claimed. Clara staggered back, but the frame seemed to loom closer. The painted veil fluttering like a ghost's breath. From behind her came his voice, velvet laced with iron, "Be my last bride. You'll never be alone again." Lucian's words sank into her bones like frost. He moved closer, each step echoing with a funereal grace. His hand extended, pale fingers gloved in eternity, as though he were offering not merely a ring, but an entire grave dressed in silk. Clara's heart screamed within her chest. The chamber seemed to shrink, walls of portraits pressing in, their empty eyes urging her to join their silent chorus. All exits were gone. She knew it now. The world she had run from, the cruel father, the hollow fiancé, the suffocating wealth lay barred behind her. Before her stretched only Lucian, his promise of unending devotion. If she refused, he would claim her by force. She could see it in the hunger of his gaze, in the tremor of his lips, as if already tasting her last breath. If she accepted, she would dissolve into one more frame, one more veil, one more name whispered into eternity. And yet, beneath her terror, stirred something darker. A pulse of fascination. To be cherished beyond betrayal. To be adored forever. To escape the rot of the living world. His beauty was unbearable. His love so absolute it threatened to shatter her will. Clara trembled. Her voice broke like glass. "And if I refuse?" Lucian smiled, gentle as death. "Then, I shall keep you anyway. No bride of mine escapes. No love of mine dies." Her blood turned to ice. But in that instant, clarity pierced the fog of fear. To save herself was impossible. To run was useless. Only one choice remained, the cruelest, most final of all. She would not belong to him. Nor to anyone. If eternity was his hunger, then her only weapon was the one thing he could never control. Her own ending. Clara lifted her chin. And though her voice trembled, her words rang with desperate defiance. "If you want me, Lucian, you will fall with me." His eyes widened, shadows stirring in their depths. For the first time, The collector faltered. The portraits around them flickered. Candle flames bending low, as though the dead brides themselves leaned forward to witness. Clara's hand tightened around the shard of glass she had taken from the broken mirror, her only fragile weapon. She pressed it against her own heart, her breath ragged. Her gaze locked with his. Lucian's composure cracked. Voice breaking like a storm. "Clara, don't." But she knew, this was the only path left. And as she drew the shard closer to her chest, the chamber of eternal brides trembled, as though the silence of centuries was about to shatter. The chamber of eternal brides quivered as Clara raised the shard against her heart. The painted eyes of the dead seemed to glisten, as though they were waiting for her decision. But then, slowly, deliberately, she let the shard fall. Lucian's gaze snapped to hers. Relief and suspicion warring in his immortal eyes. Clara's trembling fingers reached instead for the gown that hung nearest. White silk yellowed with time. Lace torn but still regal. She slipped into it, as though donning her own funeral shroud. The collector's lips parted in wonder. His voice hushed with awe. "You accept me?" Her veil fell across her face. She raised her chin with fragile grace. "Yes, I will be yours. But a bride deserves a true kiss. One kiss of marriage, not of death." For a heartbeat, silence thundered through the crypt. Then Lucian stepped forward, reverent as a priest before an altar. He placed his cold hands upon her cheeks, lowering his lips with infinite devotion. The kiss was fire and frost. Eternity collapsing into a single breath. And in that instant, Clara struck. The ceremonial dagger, once resting at the foot of the altar, slid into her palm, as if summoned. With desperate strength, she drove the blade deep into her breast through her own heart. And into his chest, where their bodies pressed together. Lucian gasped against her lips, the kiss breaking into a cry of agony. His arms clutched her tighter, not releasing but binding, as shadows splintered across the chamber walls. "Clara, note?" His voice tore like thunder. His composure shattered, grief raw as human flesh. "I loved you more than life itself." Blood stained her gown, like roses in snow. Her breath faltered, but her eyes held his clear, unbroken, triumphant. "And I," she whispered, her voice a thread of steel, "loved freedom more than love." The dagger twisted. Light ruptured through his body, consuming the portraits, the brides, the crypt itself. The painted faces screamed in silence as they disintegrated, freed from his eternal grip. Lucian staggered, still clutching Clara as if he could anchor her to existence, but her body grew heavier in his arms. The collector, the eternal groom, fell to his knees, undone not by time or decay, but by the bride who chose death over his forever. And as darkness devoured the chamber, the last thing Clara felt was release. The darkness that devoured Clara's final breath dissolved into silence. When morning broke, the world awoke not to screams or thunder, but to a haunting stillness. In the damp embrace of the forest, her body was found. She lay beneath the bowed branches, clad in the ruined wedding gown. White silk, now heavy with dew, its hem muddied with earth. Yet her face bore no terror. Instead, her lips curved faintly, a secret smile pressed upon her even in death. Her fingers, pale and fragile as porcelain, cradled a single black rose. Its petals glistened unnaturally, as though it had been plucked from the garden of another realm. Of Lucian there was no sign, no body, no shadow, no breath. Only absence like a name erased from stone. The villagers whispered of curses, of bargains sealed in midnight. Some claimed Clara had been stolen by the collector, her body left behind as a cruel illusion. Others said she had destroyed him, shattering his dominion with her own sacrifice. Yet none could agree, except on one truth. Clara's death was no victim's fate. It was a choice. Her family wept for a daughter lost, but the city murmured of a bride who defied both love and death. Songs arose in hushed taverns, poems scratched into crumbling chapel walls. Clara became myth. A story mothers told their daughters in trembling voices, that no cage, no altar, no groom of shadow could chain the heart of a woman who chose her own ending. And yet, at times, travelers swear they glimpse her on mist-heavy nights walking between the trees in her tattered gown, veil trailing like smoke. Her eyes, bright and sorrowful, linger not on men, nor on brides, but on the horizon, as those still seeking a freedom that even death could not fully grant. The tale ends not with salvation, but with a warning. Some men collect brides, some brides collect freedom, and some love stories should be buried forever. The wind carried the words like a prayer, or perhaps a curse, across the haunted forest where the bride's legacy remains.